We're so honored and delighted that you could be with us today. First, for our viewers and also the participants for our SBSD forum, can you give us a nice greeting?
Well, I'm delighted to be able to join you at this very important forum. I've been a long-time admirer of the success of South Korea, and I know you have an important election coming up in the next year. And all I can say is one of the things that you should be proud of is that nobody knows how that election will turn out. This means you're a true democracy. So congratulations.
Starting with our first question, it is a time that we feel maybe the things that the way it used to be is not really working that way. We're in a transitional period. Because of this time in day and age, what kind of talent or attributes political leaders should be more aware of or more prepared of, do you think, compared to other situations?
Well, I think the term that's often used for situations like this is resilience, the ability to bounce back and to adjust. And so if you have preconceived ideas and the world doesn't fit those preconceived ideas, you're going to lack resilience. Whereas if you understand your ideas, but you're able to adapt them to the situation that you find, then you have the resilience you need to be an effective leader.
As a political leader, to gain the resilience, what do they have to prepare for?
Well, I think a political leader faced with a very flexible and changing environment has to be able to listen. As some people say, every political leader tends to be in broadcast mode. They also have to be in receiver mode. So if you're not a listener as well as a speaker, you're not going to be a successful leader in these kinds of times. But that ability to translate from what you hear to effective speech is equally important.
As you say that they should be a receiver, we are emphasizing on voices, more diverse voices, and how these voices can be heard more. Is there any advice or good examples you could give to the political leaders? How can they be, as a conductor, to listen to more various voices and coordinate it so people feel they're respected, and also at the same time that what they think the way we should be going could be pursued?
A number of politicians have had listening tours and gone around to neighborhoods and tried to make clear that they're listening to different voices. Recently here in Boston, we had an election which elected the first Asian American, Michelle Wu, to mayor. And what people report is her success. She won in every district of the city, where she spent years listening, going around to different neighborhoods, which often had very different views, and making sure she understood what they were saying. So I would say that Michelle Wu, the new mayor of Boston, is a good example of the type of leader I'm talking about.
Professor, with COVID situation, sometimes going out and meeting people might not be as easy as it used to be.
Well, that's a good point. We've lived in a difficult period because of COVID, in which face-to-face interactions, which are normal for humans, have been restricted. And that makes the job of a leader in such a time doubly difficult. What you can do, though, is to make sure you appoint some of your closest advisors to tell you about these different points of view. So if you're surrounded with people who just are like you, you're going to be in an echo chamber. But if you make sure that some of your people that are your close advisors represent different communities, and you tell them that you don't want to just hear back an echo of what you say, but you want to know how that would sound in their communities, that's one device you can use.
Also, one of the big concerns, I think, related after the COVID-19 situation is about the global protectionism, especially when it comes to vaccine. Like country in US, you have more vaccine than your population, where a lot of countries are having really difficulty even trying to get enough for their population. I feel like our international cooperation system is not as effective as we hope. As the authority of international relations, what is your suggestion?
Well, I think the COVID was an experiment in international cooperation which failed. Sometimes people would say during the Cold War, if we were threatened by an invasion from Mars, then humans would come together and to cooperate against the invasion. Well, COVID was like an invasion from Mars. We had a virus which didn't care about the nationality of humans, and we could have cooperated, but we failed. I think the interesting question now, since it's not the last pandemic that we're going to face, is can we restore more cooperation for the next time? And in the meantime, can we get more cooperation on getting vaccinations to defeat the virus in poor countries? Because if we don't, the virus will simply mutate and will come back and infect us. And what we should do is learn the lessons of what we have to do to deal with the remains of this pandemic and to prevent the next one.
Professor, then if this is a failure, as you say that this won't be the last pandemic, and also with the climate change, feel like there are more issues that globally we have to cooperate to survive together. Where should we start?
Well, we're seeing some of this now at Glasgow at COP26 on climate. We're trying to get the implementation of the Paris Accord agreements of national contributions that were declared in 2015. Unfortunately, not all important states have attended at the top level, and some of the statements, which are promises, are so far off in the future that we're not sure whether they'll be effective. But we are at COP26 trying to get some improvements on the measurements so that we know what's happening with these nationally declared contributions.
I kind of feel these days maybe Greta Thunberg is affecting and really changing people, how they think about what we should be doing, more than a lot of the political leaders are actually succeeding. But at the same time, I think just knowing what to do doesn't really change things. It has to be really connected with the real political system. How can these voices connect with the real political world? And also, Greta Thunberg talks about uprooting the system. When it comes to political system, what do you think should be changed first?
Well, I have to admire Greta Thunberg as a young person who is taking out her frustrations by openly protesting and complaining. But if we were to follow her advice exactly, it would be a disaster. It's going to take time to move from a world of carbon fuels to decarbonization. And if all of a sudden the lights went out and people were freezing in the cold, there would be a massive reaction against governments, but also against the whole climate change movement. So I think I admire and applaud Greta Thunberg's protesting and her activism to put pressure on governments, but she hasn't proposed serious ways to make this transition. It's going to take a long time to get from fossil fuels to totally renewable fuels. And if we pretend that that's something that can be flipped like a light switch overnight, the reactions is going to be so strong that people will flip the switch back. So I'm all for Greta Thunberg in the role of protester. I don't accept her in the role of analyst.
In this day and age, how do you think, what do you think the politician's role should be, and how should it be changing?
Well, again, it comes to a point about listening. A successful political leader has to hear the different views within the community that he or she is representing, and then has to be able to articulate a way forward. Now, since everybody in a democracy doesn't think the same, there are going to be different views, and there is going to be conflict over those views. But the really successful politician is the one who builds bridges across those conflicts and finds some areas where you can get across the bridge. A good example of this was Angela Merkel in Germany, who's now stepping down. But she managed to rule from the center of the political spectrum and to include people from her left and her right. And even though people fault her on some issues, she nonetheless was able to create in Germany a vibrant, successful democracy.
Professor, one other big question our team was keep on thinking about this year is the relation of leader and followers. In Korea anyway, we kind of feel there is a power shift. And maybe that was because of the impeachment of the president, where everyone came out and was protesting, and that kind of influenced the actual result and whatnot. Do you see this kind of power shift in the leader and follower relations in general too?
Well, one of my colleagues at Harvard, a woman named Barbara Kellerman, wrote a book called Followership. And what she pointed out is that good leaders are very important, but so also are good followers. And good followers have to have broad perspectives, have to understand that they're not the only people, have to reach out to others, and also to help to inform their leaders in ways that are responsible, not just to make outrageous demands, which leaders can't reply to, but to suggest ways that leaders can make a difference. So I think you're right that educating followers and getting followers to understand that there's a relationship that's unbreakable between leaders and followers, and that the followers have to do their part. I think that is part of democracy.
Right now in Korea, especially in cultural perspective, that we're doing very well, I think, related to soft power. In a way, the K-pop group, the BTS, is globally successful. Our movie director, Bong Joon-ho, who is the director of Parasite, won the Academy Best Films last year. And also in Netflix right now, the Squid Game director is also a Korean director who made a Korean drama. It's #1 in 94 countries right now. So I'm kind of curious how you see this circumstances. And also, do you think if culturally we have this kind of soft power, will that help our political or international status also?
Korea has made enormous strides in its soft power. You just gave some good examples of cultural sources of soft power. And that means people are paying more attention to Korea and are attracted to Korea. So that's all very good. At the same time, we have to realize that soft power, which means the ability to get what you want through attraction rather than coercion or payment, rests not just on culture, but also on the values a society has and whether it lives up to them, and the policies that the government follows internationally when they're seen as legitimate. In that sense, Korea has a lot of soft power from its economic success and the fact it was able to translate that economic success into a real democracy. Not many countries can say that they've had a record as good as Korea. So that's attractive about Korea. And in terms of international politics, my main concern is that Korea has spoken too closely on its parochial interests, its near interests. And Korea really could have a powerful impact in terms of increasing its soft power by focusing more on global issues, such as climate change or pandemics or the Korean aid program of helping poor countries. So I think Korea has done a tremendous job on its soft power, but I think it's still got room that it could improve.
Is there any advice as a scholar and also who's an expert in this field? What kind of advice can give to our president candidates?
Well, I think first of all is confidence in what Korea has accomplished. As I said, if you go back to the 1960s, Korea was a very poor country at the level of some African countries. And it managed to become, the 10th or 11th largest economy in the world. But what's real remarkable is not just the economic growth, but the ability to translate that into a meaningful democracy. And so I think in that sense, the candidates should cherish that accomplishment of Korea, be proud of it, reinforce for the Korean people how important that accomplishment is, and make sure in their own behavior that they don't degrade the political system, that they don't degrade the democracy which Korea has created. Democracy is never perfect. It's always messy. Churchill once said it's the worst system of government except for all the others. And I think in the campaign, the candidates have to make sure that they express that to the Korean people and don't spend all their time just tearing each other down.
Thank you.
Very good. Bye.